Chapter 13 of J.S. Bach by Albert Schweitzer. Translated by Ernest Newman. Read for you by Chiquito Crasto. Music performed by Jonathan Schofield. Read for you by Chiquito Crasto. The Organ Works. Of all his preludes and fugues for the organ, only the prelude and fugue in E-flat, in the third part of the Klavierübung, was published by Bach. Everything else of this order has come down to us in manuscript, either in autographs comprising about a third, or in copies, or even in copies of copies. It is really wonderful that under these circumstances more should not have been lost. We possess the F minor prelude, and its fugue, for example, only in a copy made by a pupil of Kittel. We owe the preservation of the great C minor fantasia to Krebs, who, as he notes at the end of it, made a copy of it on the 10th January 1751, a few months after the master's death. This manuscript had almost fallen into the hands of a shopkeeper for use as waste paper. Beneficent fate willed that it should be rescued by Reichard Koht, organist in Altenburg. The Russian pianist Palchkow of Petersburg deserves mention as a kind of unfaithful steward among copyists. He undertook to improve the Dorian toccata, and to this end behaved towards it, as Rust says, like a Russian censor. The majority of the organ compositions belong to the Weimar and pre-Weimar periods, at Cothen and in the first Leipzig period. Bach appears only occasionally to have written for this instrument. Afterwards, however, about 1735, the first love revives in him, and he writes the gigantic organ works of his latest and maturest period. In the same period he sifted and revised his earlier compositions, during which occupation he was overtaken by death. It is only in exceptional cases that we can determine precisely the date of composition of the separate preludes and fugues. Spita thinks that the great G major prelude with its fugue, Peters II, number 2, BG 15, number 11, belongs to 1724 or 1725, and the C major prelude, Peters II, number 1, BG 15, number 15 to 1730. He bases this opinion on the fact that the watermark of the paper used for the autograph is the same as that in the scores of the cantatas of those years. As a rule, we have to rely on internal chronological evidences. Fortunately, they are fairly clear. For every discriminating player, the preludes and fugues on close acquaintance fall into four groups: the works in which Bach is still under the influence of contemporary masters, those in which his independent mastery is evident, the consummate compositions of the Weimar period, and the final works. There are about a dozen preludes and fugues in which Bach reveals himself as a gifted pupil of Frescobaldi and Buxtehude. The storm and stress of the whole of the early organ art comes to life again in these works. The preludes have a kind of dramatic excitement, and are somewhat spasmodic and lacking in unity. The fugues are often confused, but the proportions on which the works are laid out give us the feeling that the future promises something great. Bach owed his development not only to his perpetually improving organ technique, but before all to the study of Legrenzi, Corelli, and Vivaldi, whose music was just then becoming known in Germany. Here he learned what neither Buxtehude nor Frescobaldi had been able to teach him: clearness and plasticity of the musical structure. In the C minor fugue, Peters IV, number 6, BG 38, number 14, upon a theme of Legrenzi, and in that in B minor, Peters IV, number 8, BG 38, number 19, in which Corelli's fugue on is expanded from 39 bars to 100. We see his efforts to realize a new ideal and to design in simpler, broader lines. In the Canzona in D minor, Peters IV, number 10, BG 38, number 20, he has entered the world of beautiful forms, which he never leaves again. In the G major Fantasia, Peter IV, number 2, BG 38, number 10, there is a lengthy 5-part section of tranquil and finished polyphony, surrounded by quick and brilliant, yet at the same time simplified northern passage work. Thus did Bach win his freedom from Buxtehude by means of the Italians, and was enabled to bring to glorious reality the ideals that for 2 generations had agitated German organ music. We can only surmise in what order the works came in which he rises to independent mastery. An important point in Bach's work is no doubt indicated by the small G minor fugue, Peters IV, No. 7, BG 38, No. 18, and the well-known D minor toccata and fugue, Peters IV, No. 4, BG 15, page 267. So vigorously and broadly laid out a theme as that of the G minor fugue is not to be met with in previous organ music, to say nothing of the rapid and weighty development of the fugue, in which there is hardly a trace of the ordinary fugal phraseology. Only the second pedal passage, that seems to belong to the older world, is inexpressive. In the D minor toccata and fugue, the strong and ardent spirit has finally realized the laws of form. A single dramatic ground thought unites the daring passage work on the toccata, that seems to pile up like wave on wave, and in the fugue the intercalated passages in broken chords only serve to make the climax all the more powerful. The peculiar charm of these works comes from their spontaneous freshness of invention. They affect the hearer almost more powerfully than any other of Bach's organ works, and to play them is always to experience something of what the master himself must have felt when for the first time he exploited the full possibilities of the organ with regard to wealth of tone and variety of combination. For this reason, the wonderful pathos of the prelude and fugue in D major, Peters IV, No. 3, BG 15, No. 2, and the toccata and fugue in C major, Peters III, No. 8, BG 15, page 253, is as potent today as it ever was. Perhaps we are able to appreciate these works even more than our ancestors, for the great music of the 19th century has certainly had one result. It has given those who have been nourished upon it a clear criterion for distinguishing between true and false pathos, and a double sense of enjoyment of the true which is so rare. In the brilliant and dashing fugues belonging to these preludes, and again the one belonging to the majestic C major prelude, Peters IV, No. 1, BG 15, No. 1, there is an extraordinary display of virtuosity. We must not judge them too strictly by the rule that a fugue should be good in the first part, better in the middle, and excellent in the last, for the two fugues in C major, at any rate, fall off in quality somewhat towards the end. Between these masterpieces of his youth and his real masterpieces, Bach himself has drawn a clearly perceptible line. The former he left as they were, at the others he worked incessantly until he had given them their definite form. Thus it happens that for these works it is not the oldest copies, often not even the autographs, that are the most valuable, but the manuscripts that embody the work in its latest form. The extant autograph of the prelude and fugue in A major, Peters II, No. 3, BG 15, No. 6, for example, has no practical value, since it gives us merely an earlier imperfect form of the work, in 3/8 time instead of 3/4. It should be noted, too, that in the manuscripts the indication of certain preludes as fantasias or toccatas is not uniform. Sometimes they are not even entitled prelude, but vaguely pièce d'orgue. These are occasional Italian titles. Bach worked longest at the fugues in A minor, Peters II, No. 8, BG 15, No. 13, and G minor, Peters II, No. 4, BG 15, No. 12. The original form of the A minor subject is found in a 3-part clavier fugue in this shape. The elements of the latter theme are already all there, but the great and simple melodic line that the musician is striving after is as yet hidden by accessories, and is too abbreviated to be effective. Only after long labours did it attain the calm plasticity of the finished theme, with its mixture of playfulness and strength in the semiquavers. The plan of the fugue and its main incidents are already prefigured in the first form. The A minor has also undergone revision. There is a copy of it, J. P. Kellner's, in which its essential chromatic line does not come out clearly through the majestic thread of the opening. Definite form. Original form. In the second edition of his great Generalbassschule, Mattheson tells us that at an organ examination in 1725 he gave the candidates the following theme to develop extempore. He does not mention Bach's name, but says he knows well to whom the theme belongs, and who was the first to work it out artistically. The most natural assumption is that he had heard the fugue during Bach's Hamburg journey of 1720. It would thus be one of the works that the master played to Reinken at that time, perhaps out of compliment to him, the theme of the fugue being, in fact, borrowed from Reinken. In Bach's version, the theme is much simpler and more elegant. It runs thus. How is this difference to be explained? In the form in which Mattheson quotes it, the original one, which Bach has altered and improved? Or has Mattheson remembered it wrongly and misquoted it? The probability is that the theme never existed save in its present perfect form. Mattheson knew it, but he could not give it to his candidate in this shape, because, according to the rules of fugue, it was incorrect. It is laid down in the rules that a fugue theme shall not extend over an octave. The Hamburg examiner therefore thought it necessary to alter Bach's theme in order to bring it into conformity with the eternal laws of the art. The fugues in B minor and G minor are virtuoso works, like those in C major and D major. Not, however, like those merely brilliant streams of notes, but perfect architectonic creations, late Gothics, in music. As in that medieval form of architecture, the luxuriant detail of the pierced work only serves to unify and vitalize the simple, boldly flung lines, and to exhibit power in its utmost flexibility. The A minor fugue is the simpler and clearer in construction. That in G minor surpasses it, however, in richness of imagination. In general, however, in the Weimar fugues, virtuosity becomes less and less prominent. The themes become compact, simple, unadorned, almost severe. In the working out there is no longer any thought of effect. On the borderline stands the G major fugue, Peters II, No. 2, BG 15, No. 11, the theme of which, in a minor form, however, is used again in the first chorus of the cantata Ich hatte viel Bekummernis, No. 21. The themes of the others no longer proceed by way of rapid passage work, but are built up of massive notes. This similarity groups them into a category of their own. They are the fugues in C major, Peters II, No. 1, BG 15, No. 15, C minor, Peters II, No. 6, BG 15, No. 16, C minor, Peters III, No. 6, BG 15, No. 7, F minor, Peters II, No. 5, BG 15, No. 4, F major, Peters III, No. 2, BG 15, No. 10, D minor, Peters III, No. 3, BG 15, No. 8, and A major, Peters II, No. 3, BG 15, No. 6. Their lack of showy effects accounts for these works not being so popular with players and audiences as the A minor and G minor fugues. But one has only to live with them to prize them more highly than those, even if at first sight they have not the same fascination. They represent the pure sublime, not as before, the sublime in guise of the pathetic. The C minor fugue and the F minor fugue are so tremendously tragic precisely because they have divested themselves of every shred of passion and express only great sorrow and deep longing. The theme of the D minor fugue is indescribably suggestive of tranquil power. It throws out its limbs like an arc of mighty stones. Those who still maintain that Bach's fugues are too elaborately wrought for church use are apparently ignorant of this one, or do not feel the Palestrina-like character of its style, or perceive that all these themes are really embodiments of religious ideas. An organist who recognizes their true character once declared that he could no longer hear them without imagining a secret superscription to each of them. The C minor fugue with its grand victory over its chromatic counter-theme, seemed to him the symbol of confident faith. Over the sunny and vivacious A major fugue, he would write the gladsomeness of faith. It is worth noting that the same theme, slightly modified, dominates the orchestral introduction to the cantata Tritt auf die Glaubensbahn, No. 152. The curious step rhythm that runs through it should be noted. The question of how many of the preludes and fugues originated together is difficult to decide. The preludes and fugues in A major, D minor, toccata, C major, and G major seem to have sprung from the same ideas. This is also the case with the prelude and fugue in E minor, Peters III, No. 10, BG 15, No. 3, which are unique in their brevity and concision. In the A minor fugue, the inner kinship of its theme with the motives of the prelude is so obvious that it seems to rise from the foaming prelude like Venus from the waves of the sea. On the other hand, it looks as if the two C minor preludes and the toccata in F major belonged to a later period than their respective fugues. Bach has apparently substituted these preludes for earlier ones, with which he was dissatisfied. If this be the case, he has nevertheless conceived the substituted preludes in the spirit of the fugues, preserving in each case an inner community between the two pieces. He has always conceived preludes and fugues in pairs. If we find isolated specimens of each, they are works rejected by him at some revision or other. We may probably assume two dates at which Bach revised his organ works. The first fell in the period when Friedemann and Emmanuel were in a position to play their father's compositions. This would account for the fact that the preludes and fugues in G major and C major, in their definitive form, are written on paper of 1725 and 1730. A later and much more drastic revision probably took place towards the end of his Leipzig period, when Bach, having practically ceased to write cantatas, began to feel a new interest in his organ works. It is possible that he had the idea of making a complete collection of his prelude and fugues, as well as of the larger chorales he had revised. Then after his death the basis for such a collection existed is proved by the fact that in a number of manuscript copies the fugues and preludes in A minor and C major, and the pair in C minor, Peters II, No. 6, BG 15, No. 16, with the three last Leipzig works, the preludes and fugues in C major, Peters II, No. 7, BG 15, No. 17, B minor, Peters II, No. 10, BG 15, No. 14, and E minor, Peters II, No. 9, BG 15, No. 18, are grouped together as the six great preludes and fugues. Besides these three great Leipzig works, there is a fourth, the prelude and triple fugue in E flat major, Peters III, No. 1, BG 3, pages 173 and 254, which embody the great chorales that appeared in 1739 as the third part of the Klavierübung. The preludes and fugues in C major, B minor, and E minor, however, belong to a later date. The works of this period, apart from the preludes and fugues in C major, show a return to the style of Buxtehude. They are not constructed on a single unified idea, like those of Bach's middle epoch, but are based on the dramatic opposition of different themes. Nevertheless, the power and vastness of the design gives the works an air of grandeur that is very different from the dramatic restlessness of Buxtehude and Frescobaldi. The old German organ style thus receives its final transfiguration in the symphonic works of Bach's old age, just as his last organ chorale, Wenn wir in höchsten Noten sind, brings the Pachelbel style of chorale treatment to perfection. It is the symphonic character of the latest works that makes it possible that the two preludes in C minor, which are conceived in the same spirit, belong to the same epoch, although they are grouped with fugues of the Weimar period. In the F major toccata and the C major prelude, Peters II, No. 7, BG 15, No. 17, there is a return to the virtuoso style, now, however, raised to a higher dignity and simplicity. In each case, a single idea is worked out in complete accordance with its own nature. The C major prelude reminds us strongly of the first chorus in the cantata Sie werden aus Saba alle kommen, No. 65. The prelude in E flat major that introduces the greater chorales symbolizes godlike majesty. The triple fugue at the end of them is a symbol of the Trinity. The same theme recurs in three connected fugues, but each time with another personality. The first fugue is calm and majestic, with an absolutely uniform movement throughout. In the second, the theme seems to be disguised, and is only occasionally recognizable in its true shape, as if to suggest the divine assumption of an earthly form. In the third, it is transformed into rushing semiquavers, as if the Pentecostal wind were coming roaring from heaven. Perhaps the most striking thing among these Leipzig works is the flowery arabesque of the B minor prelude. The E minor prelude and fugue are so mighty in design and have so much harshness blended with their power that the hearer can only grasp them after several hearings. Time is needed again before one can feel at home in the quiet world of the B minor and C major fugues. It is not less certain that only by degrees do we find our footing in the majestic monotony of the F major toccata and the C major prelude. This does not imply, however, that these works should not be performed in church and at sacred concerts, but rather that they could not be played often enough. Nor are they too long for the church service. The few minutes that they take can be found somehow in the liturgy. This is not too much to expect. To play the works with cuts is criminal. The 8 little preludes and fugues, Peters 8, BG 38, and the organ sonata, Peters 1, BG 15, were written for the instruction of the 2 eldest sons. Any student with a fairly good piano technique can take up these works at once in order to habilitate himself in pedal study, as they said in Bach's time. He will reach his goal quicker and better than with modern organ schools, against which, while fully admitting their merits, the reproach always holds good that they keep the student too long at the elements and are too pedagogic in plan. Bach, on the other hand, loved to place his pupils at once in the midst of difficulties. In the strictest sense of the term, it is wrong to speak of Bach's organ sonatas. The 2 manuscripts in which they have come down to us, one from Friedemann's possession, the other from Emmanuel's, prove that they are really works for the clavicembalo with its 2 manuals and pedals. This instrument was at that time in common use. It was excellently adapted for playing in 3 real parts, which accounts for the sonatas being in strict trio form. This does not imply that Bach never played them on the organ also. He intended the last movement of the E minor sonata to come between the prelude and the fugue in G major, Peters 2, number 2, BG 15, number 11, and the largo from the C major sonata to come between the prelude and the fugue in G minor, Peters 3, number 5, BG 15, number 5. If these sonatas were written for Friedemann, they must have originated towards the end of the 2nd decade of the century. Some sections of them are indeed older. The first movement of the D minor sonata, for example, that occurs among the variants of the first part of the Well-Tempered Clavichord. This collection was finished in 1722. An older version of the Adagio and of the Vivace of the sonata in E minor for oboe d'amore, gamba, and continuo figures as the introduction to the second part of the cantata Die Himmel Kreuz Irrschalen, number 76, which certainly belongs to the year 1723. According to Spita, the whole of the organ sonatas were in existence as early as 1727. In 1733, Friedemann went to Dresden as organist. We cannot say enough of the beauty of these sonatas, writes Forkel. For the connoisseur, indeed, there is hardly a purer aesthetic delight than to pursue these 3 contrapuntal lines, so free and yet so bound by the laws of beauty, through their delightful intertwinings, to say nothing of the perfection of the themes. The dreamy subject of the Adagio of the D minor sonata made even Bach himself its captive, took it up again later and made it into a trio full of longing for clavier, flute, and violin. Forkel tells us that Friedemann owed his consummate technique to these sonatas, which is quite credible. To this very day they are the gradus ad Parnassum for every organist. Whoever has studied them thoroughly will find scarcely a single difficulty in the old or even in modern organ music that he has not met with there and learned how to overcome. And before all, he will have attained that absolute precision that is the chief essential for good organ playing, since in this complicated trio playing the slightest unevenness in touch is heard with appalling clearness. It is noteworthy that Friedemann's manuscript of the sonatas, on which the Peters edition is founded, contains many more embellishment than Bach's own autograph copy which Emmanuel possessed. This belonged to a later date than Friedemann's copy. We see from this how Bach became more and more sparing with ornaments. It is indeed one of the reproaches levelled against him by his critic Scheiber. The edition of the Bach Gesellschaft follows the autograph. Both manuscripts are now in the Berlin Library. The Passacaglia, Peters 1, page 75, BG 15, page 289, was also written in the first place for the cembalo with pedal and later arranged for the organ. As a matter of fact, its polyphonic structure fits in so thoroughly for the organ that we can hardly understand nowadays how anyone could have ventured to play it on a stringed instrument. On the other hand, there is no organ work that makes such demands, as this is the matter of registration. Each of the 20 sections constructed on the repeated bass theme must have its characteristic tone color, and yet, if disconnectedness is to be avoided, no color must be too sharply differentiated from its predecessor or its successor. Pascaglia, in French pasacaille, properly denotes an old Spanish dance. Musicians understood by it a piece constructed on a recurring bass theme. In the chiaconna, in French chaconne, which is also developed like a string of pearls, it was permissible to introduce the theme in any voice. In Bach's work, the theme appears several times in the upper part, so that it is not a pure pascaglia, but partakes of the nature of both the pascaglia and the chaconne. The work was conceived under the influence of Buxtehude, whose organ compositions in this genre are of considerable significance. It therefore seems somewhat strange that there are not a number of youthful works by Bach in this style. He saw clearly, however, that on the whole the incoherency of this kind of work was not suitable to the greatest organ music, and he ventured upon the experiment only with this colossal theme. He follows his teacher again in grouping the pascaglia with the fugue. Buxtehude, however, placed this at the beginning, while Bach, with more reason, places it at the end, where it has the effect of rising to a climax. But in the last resort, no comparison of Bach's pascaglia with any of Buxtehude's works of the same kind is possible, for the pupil puts into his a dramatic life that was beyond the power of the master. Both the external and the internal evidence points to the later Weimar period as the date of origin of this work. The autograph was still known to exist about the middle of the 19th century. Since then it has disappeared completely, like that of the prelude and fugue in B minor, that must be somewhere in Scotland. Both autographs were used for Peter's edition. The chorale preludes which he thought worth preserving were grouped by Bach in 5 collections, containing altogether about 90 of these works. They are the Orgelbewegung, begun in Weimar and written out in a fair copy at Cothen, the chorales published in 1739 as the third part of the Klavierübung, 6 chorales published by Schubler of Zella about 1747, the canonic variations on the Christmas hymn Von Himmel hoch da komm ich her, published about the same time by Balthasar Schmidt of Nuremberg, which Bach afterwards submitted to the Miesler Society in joining its ranks, and the collection of 18 great chorales, during the revision of which he was overtaken by death. Another 50 or so chorale preludes, mostly youthful works, have come down to us in copies made by pupils and friends. Some of these, for example, that for double pedal on An Varsefluchen Babylons, Peters 5, number 122, would certainly have been included by Bach in the collection had he got that far with the revision. It is not clear what aim he had in view in publishing the 6 chorales issued by Schubler. They are only arrangements of 3-part chorale arias from the cantatas that have nothing in common with his other chorale preludes and do not even go particularly well on the organ. He already had in his portfolio dozens of splendid chorales ready for engraving. Why did he pass these over and issue mere transcriptions? The chorale partitas upon Christ der du bist der helle Tag, O Gott du fromme Gott, and Sei Greguset, Jesu Gütig, Peters 5, page 60 to 91, BG 40, page 107 to 123, in which the number of variations corresponds to that of the verses in the respective hymns, are certainly works of his earliest youth, as is evident from the awkward harmonization of the chorale melody and the optimal use of the pedal. When he wrote these works, Bach had not yet found himself. He was still a pupil of Bohm. Where and when he composed them, whether at Lüneburg or Arnstadt, cannot be determined. In any case, they are clever students' exercises which it is impossible to play without being delighted with the work of original thematic figuration which they exhibit. Bach seems later on to have revised the third partita, as is fairly clear from the improvised harmonization and the obbligato use of the pedal in the last variations. The 5-part final variation is a masterpiece. Afterwards Bach no longer writes chorale variations. He was probably led away from the genre by purely artistic considerations, though we must not forget that in Weimar and Leipzig he no longer had any practical use for such works, which were only serviceable in places where, according to the old custom, the organ struck in between the singing and worked out independently every other verse of the chorale, the singing ceasing. When at the end of his career Bach once more returned to this form and wrote the variations on Von Himmel hoch da komm ich her, his only purpose was to pack into a single chorale the complete art of canon, and in the last variation he could not deny himself the pleasure of introducing all four lines of the melody simultaneously in the last three bars. If this work already shews the tendency to abstract thought that was characteristic of his last years, there is, for all that, a good deal of emotion in these chorale arrangements. They are full of Christmas joyousness and cheeriness. The first variation is of a truly bewitching beauty of tone. It is an interesting fact that besides the engraved copy we possess an original manuscript that is of later date and gives the definitive version. It is evident then that even in his printed compositions Bach always found something to improve. In the true chorale prelude, Bach appears to have cultivated chiefly the forms of Pachelbel, Bohm, Buxtehude and Reinken. Towards the end of the Weimar period, however, he becomes independent of his masters and produces a type of his own, the chorale prelude of the Orgelbewegung. In this the melody is used as a cantus firmus, unaltered and uninterrupted, usually in the uppermost voice. Round it plays an independently conceived motive, not derived from any of the lines of the melody, but prompted by the text of the chorale and embodying the poetic idea that Bach regarded as characteristic for music and expressible in musical terms. Thus in the chorale preludes of the Orgelbewegung the melody and the text are both presented at the same time, the cantus firmus being poetically illustrated by means of the characteristic motive. Here Bach has realized the ideal of the chorale prelude. The method is the most simple imaginable, and at the same time the most perfect. Nowhere in the Dürer-like character of his musical style so evident as in these small chorale preludes. Simply by the precision and characteristic quality of the line of the contrapuntal motive he expresses all that has to be said, and so makes clear the relation of the music to the text whose title it bears. The Orgelbewegung is thus not only of significance in the history of the development of the chorale prelude, but is one of the greatest achievements in music. Never before had any one expressed the text in pure tone in this way. No one afterwards undertook to do so with such simple means. At the same time, the essence of Bach's art comes clearly into view for the first time in this work. He is not satisfied with formal perfection and fullness of sound. Otherwise, he would have continued to work with the forms and formulae of his teachers in the chorale prelude. He aims at more than this. He aspires after plastic expression of ideas, and so creates a tone speech of his own. The elements of such a speech already exist in the Orgelbewegung. The characteristic motives of the various chorales correspond to many of Bach's later emotional and pictorial tone symbols. The Orgelbewegung is thus the lexicon of Bach's musical speech. This must be our starting point if we would understand what he is striving to express in the themes of the cantatas and the passions. Until the significance of the Orgelbewegung was perceived, the fundamental character of Bach's art remained, almost down to the present day, obscure and disputable. The title, indeed, does not indicate the universal significance of this collection. It runs thus: the little organ book, wherein instruction is given to a beginning organist to work out a chorale in every style, also to perfect himself in the study of the pedal being treated quite obligato throughout in the chorales herein contained. To the honor of the Lord Most High, and that my neighbor may be taught thereby. Autor Johann Sebastian Bach, Capellae Magistro SPR and Haltuni Cotinensis. The autograph is now in the Royal Library at Berlin. It contains 92 leaves, and is bound in pasteboard with leather back and corners. At the head of each page Bach wrote the title of the chorale that was to appear thereon, so that if the composition extended beyond the page he had to paste an extra strip of paper below or make use of the tablature. All these chorales were written in Weimar. Afterwards in Cothen he made a careful fair copy of them. There still exists a Weimar autograph of the Orgelbewegung that once belonged to Mendelssohn. It lacks the pages containing the first 12 chorales. On the cover is a note to the effect that the owner had cut out 3 more leaves, 2 for his bride's album and 1 for Clara Schumann. The order of the chorales is that of their succession in the church year. This is easily understood when we remember that at that time each Sunday had its own special hymns allotted to it once for all, and that other organists of the epoch, for example B. Walter of Weimar, also wrote similar yearly cycles of chorale preludes. In the details of their grouping, however, especially with regard to the chorales appropriated to feast days, each individual was naturally allowed a certain amount of liberty. Bach made the most ingenious use of this freedom. He disposed of the chorales in such a way that the Christmas ones formed a miniature Christmas oratorio, those of the Passion time, a Passion, and those of Easter, an Easter oratorio. He aimed only at other effects of contrast. The chorale Das alte Jahr vergangen ist, 5 No. 20, is a sorrowful meditation in the twilight as the last evening draws to its close. It is followed by the jubilant song In dir ist Freude, 5 No. 34, that is filled with the light of the new day. Of the two chorales relating to the presentation in the temple and Simeon's hymn of praise, the first Mit Freud und Freud, Ich fahr dahin, 5 No. 41, depicts a joyous longing for death, and the other Herrgott nun schloss den Himmel auf, 5 No. 24, a sorrowful longing. The somber hymn on original sin, Durch Adams Fall, 5 No. 13, is followed at once by the hymn of salvation in Christ, Es ist das Heil uns kommen, 5 No. 16. The Orgelbewegung is barely one-third finished. The Cotton autograph is planned out for 169 chorales. 45 of these are complete. For the others we have only the white pages. What is the explanation of this? Did the Leipzig appointment come just at this time and prevent the continuation of the work? In this case, why did not Bach resume it when later on he turned his attention again to the chorale prelude? The abandonment of the collection in its incomplete state must have been due to some inward reason. Speaking generally, it is the grouped chorales relating to the various feast times that are finished, and of the others those of which the strong pictorial or characteristic quality seem to make them specially suitable for music. The text of the numbers not completed lack these musical qualities. No characteristic theme could be evolved from them. They could only be developed as pure music, not in their poetic or pictorial aspects. All the chorales of this collection, however, were to be little tone pictures, and as circumstances made this plan impossible, Bach preferred to leave the collection unfinished. How strictly he adhered to the characteristic type he had in his mind for the Orgelbewegung can be seen from the fact that he did not include beautiful chorales like Herzlich tut mich verlangen, 5 No. 27, and Liebster Jesu wir sind ihr, 5 No. 36, which were quite suitable as regards their size and were certainly in existence at that time, simply because they were not constructed on a characteristic motive. When Griepenkerl edited the Orgelbewegung for Peters about the middle of the 40s, he unfortunately altered the original order, in which each chorale is in a position that explains it, and adopted instead a merely alphabetical arrangement, besides inserting smaller chorale preludes and chorale fugettas that did not form part of the collection. We get the correct Orgelbewegung by eliminating from the fifth volume of Peters' edition of the organ works number 7, 18, 20, 23, 26, 27, 36, 39, 43, 47, 52, and 53, and arranging the remainder in this order. Numbers 42, 19, 22, 38, 46, 17, 11, 49, 50, 35, 40, 31, 6, 55, 21, 10, 34, 41, 24, 44, 3, 8, 9, 45, 56, 29, 5, 32, 4, 14, 15, 28, 25, 37, 12, 48, 13, 16, 30, 33, 51, 54, 2, 1. Between numbers 28 and 25 again must be inserted the first part of the chorale Komm Gott Schöpfer, Heiliger Geist, 8 No. 35, which, although Spita 1, 611 does not think so, was originally part of the Orgelbewegung. The second verse was not added until later. Spita is of opinion that the treatment of the pedal in the first part is not sufficiently obbligato to authorize our regarding the work as composed for the Orgelbewegung, but every organist will testify that the obbligato character of the pedal is shown by the fact that it is much more difficult to play than it looks. It is by no means easy always to strike these simple notes on the weakest part of the bar. The plan of the second collection of chorale preludes is explicable, like the first, from the order of the old hymn books. The Orgelbewegung deals with the Cantica de Tempore, that is, hymns grouped according to their order in the church year. The other collection that appeared in 1739 as the third part of the Klavierübung deals with the catechism hymns. By these was understood, at that time, a small collection of classical hymns on the main points of the Christian doctrine, that were included in every hymn book. The arrangement was the same as in the Lutheran catechism. The core of them was formed by the Luther's hymns, Die sind die Heiligen sein Gebot, Wir glauben all an einen Gott, Vater unser in Himmelreich, Christ unser Herr zum Jordan kam, Jesus Christus unser Heiland, the communion hymn, and Aus tiefer Not schrei ich zu dir, the confessional hymn. Bach chose this catechism in the form of Lutheran hymns for musical treatment. In order to have the dogma complete, he prefaced these 5 chief hymns with a Kyrie and Gloria to the Holy Trinity from the Leipzig service, that is, the 3 hymns Kyrie Gott Vater, Kyrie Gott Sohn, Kyrie Gott Heiliger Geist, and the hymn to the Trinity Allein Gott in der Ho sei this last of course in 3 versions. Luther, however, had written a greater and a smaller catechism. In the former he demonstrates the essence of the faith, in the latter he addresses himself to the children. Bach, the musical father of the Lutheran Church, feels it incumbent on him to do likewise. He gives us a larger and a smaller arrangement of each chorale, with the exception of Allein Gott in der Ho sei The larger chorales are dominated by a sublime musical symbolism, aiming simply at illustrating the central idea of the dogma contained in the words. The smaller ones are of bewitching simplicity. The whole collection is introduced by the majestic E-flat major prelude and ended by the triple fugue in the same key. One would have thought this conception at any rate interesting enough to be respected in the various editions. This, however, has never been done except in the original edition of the Bach-Gesellschaft. Even Neumann, in the practical edition he brought out for Breitkopf and Hartel, mixes these works up with the others without any regard to their special quality and their inner connection. The Peters edition of these catechism chorales can be reconstructed thus. Introduction. Prelude in E-flat major, 3, number 1. Trinity, Kyrie. Large version, 4, numbers 39 ABC. Small version, 7, numbers 40 ABC. Allein Gott in der Ho sei large version, 5, numbers 5, 6 and 10. The 10 Commandments. Dies sind die heiligen Gebot. Large version, 6, number 19. Small version, number 20. Faith. Wir glauben all an einen Gott. Large version, 7, number 60. Small version, 7, number 61. The Lord's Prayer. Vater unser im Himmelreich. Large version, 7, number 52. Small version, 5, number 47. Baptism. Christ unser Herr zum Jordan kam. Large version, 5, number 17. Small version, 6, number 18. Penitence. Aus tiefer Not schrei ich zu dir. Large version, 6, number 13. Small version, 6, number 14. The Lord's Supper. Jesus Christus unser Heiland, der von uns. Large version, 6, number 30. Small version, 6, number 33. Conclusion. Triple fugue in E-flat major, 3, number 1. Bach was not correct in placing the penitence between the baptism and the communion, and it is impossible to say why he did so. It really should come last among these doctrinal pieces. These chorales were probably all composed at the same time, expressly for this collection, towards the end of the 30s. This was certainly the case with the larger versions. In the case of the smaller ones, we cannot be sure whether they formed an earlier collection. It is otherwise with the last collection, the 18 chorales. It contains for the most part compositions of the Weimar period, which Bach at the end of his life revised and partly wrote. Rust, indeed, in the preface to volume 25 of the BG edition, maintains against Spita that they belong to the Leipzig period, but this is hardly probable. They are plainly masterpieces that Bach wrote while still more or less dependent on the forms laid down by Buxtehude, Bohm and Pachelbel. It contains no chorales of the types of those in the Orgelbewegung. How Bach had polished these works is evident from the 15 older versions that have come down to us. The autograph of the 18 chorales is in the Berlin Library. It belonged at one time to Philipp Emanuel. The last chorale, Wenn wir in höchsten Noten sind, is incomplete in the autograph, and must have been completed from the Art of Fugue, in which it appeared as Bach's last work. Here again it is unfortunate that, regardless of Bach's last wishes, these revised chorales are always mixed up in order to get a purely alphabetical arrangement. Although it is true, this collection is not like the 2 others, governed by a definite sequence of ideas. The authentic order can be restored in the Peters edition thus: 1. Komm, Heiliger Geist. 7, number 16. 2. Komm, alio modo. 7, number 37. 3. An Wasserflüssen Babylon. 6, number 12b. 4. Schmücke dich, O Leibe Schiele. 7, number 49. 5. Herr Jesu Christ, dich zu uns wend. 6, number 27. 6. O Lamm Gottes unschuldig. 7, number 48. 7. Nun danket alle Gott. 7, number 43. 8. Von Gott will ich nicht lassen. 7, number 56. 9. Nun komm der Heiden heiland. 7, number 45. 10. Nun alio modo, trio. 7, number 46. 11. Nun alio modo, 7, number 47. 12. Allein Gott in der Hohe Er. 6, number 9. 13. Allein alio modo. 6, number 8. 14. Allein alio modo, trio. 6, number 7. 15. Jesus Christus unser Heiland. 6, number 31. 16. Jesus alio modo. 6, number 32. 17. Komm Gott Schöpfer Heiliger Geist. 7, number 35. 18. Wenn wir in höchsten Noten sind, vor deinen Thron tret ich allhier. 7, number 58. The trio upon Nun komm der Heiden heiland. 8, number 46, makes so strange an impression on us that it seems like a transcription of a movement from a cantata. Strictly in the old Pachelbel style is the angular arrangement of Nun danket alle Gott, 7, number 43, that charms both player and hearer more and more as their familiarity with it increases. The chorale Eilen Gott in der Hohe Er, 6, number 9, is purely in the style of Bohm. To many people it seems rather youthful. In the prelude on Nun komm der Heiden heiland, 7, number 45, that is laid out on the same plan, the arabesque-like contour of the melody seems much more mature and perfect. It is full of a dreamy expectancy. We see the style of Bohm perfected and idealized again in the chorale An Wasserflüssen, Babylon, 6, number 12b, in which the melody is given to the tenor. We are reminded of Buxtehude by the arrangement of Jesus Christus unser Heiland, 6, number 32, the brilliant and animated Komm Heiliger Geist, Herr Gott, 7, number 36, and Gott Schöpfer Heiliger Geist, 7, number 35, and the Von Gott will ich nicht lassen, 7, number 56. The most important works in this collection, however, do not conform to any strict type. They are fantasias planned on broad lines, with free thematic use of one or more of the lines of the melody of the chorale. Bach has welded the forms into a new unity, through which the older outlines are only visible as through a fine blue mist. This chorale form might fairly be called the mystic. The chorale themes become veiled, the melodic line more free, as if everything external had been lost, and only the general mood, the fundamental emotional idea, were being expressed. In this style the chorales Allein Gott in der Hohe Er, 6, number 8, Komm Heiliger Geist, Herr Gott, 7, number 37, and Schmücke dich, O Liebe Seele, 7, number 49, form a category of their own. Mendelssohn was so affected by the mood painting in the last named chorale that he told Schumann, if life were to deprive him of hope and faith, this one chorale would bring them back. The triple chorale on O Lamm Gottes, 7, number 48, and the arrangement of Jesus Christ unser Heiland, 6, number 31, represent the ideas more in their dramatic aspect. So much so that one is almost tempted to agree with Rust against Spita and date these works from the Leipzig period. It is difficult to agree with Spita's division of Bach's chorale arrangements into the three categories of pure chorale, preludes, organ chorales, and chorale fantasias. It is more reasonable to group them according to the style of treatment, in the fugue style of Pachelbel, the coloristic style of Bohm and Reinken, or free fantasias in the style of Buxtehude. There is further the type of the Orgelbewegung, in which the characteristic motive illustrates the uninterruptive cantus firmus, and finally the great chorales that offer a perfected synthesis of all the forms. Besides the arrangement of An Wasserflüssen, Babylon, for double pedal, 6, number 12a, there were several excellent and interesting chorales not included by Bach in any collection, among which may be mentioned the Fantasia on Eine feste Burg, 6, number 22, the sublime fugue on the Magnificat, 7, number 41, the joyous trio on Nun freut euch, Leiben Christen, Gemein, 7, number 44, and the expressive chorale, Erbarm dich mein, o Herrgott, BG 40, page 60, which in its kind, the melody is supported by evenly flowing quavers, is unique among Bach's chorale preludes. Christ lag in Todesbanden, 6, number 15, Jesu mein Freude, 6, number 29, von Himmel hoch, da komm ich her, 7, numbers 54 and 55, and Wir glauben all, an einen Gott, 7, number 62, are all admittedly youthful works, in which we can follow Bach's earliest development. It is not clear why the harmonization of the chorale Herrgott, dich loben wir, number 26, that is meant as an accompaniment to the hymn, should figure among the chorale preludes in all editions, even in that of Neumann. What is needed is a cheap edition of the chorale preludes in their original form, distinguishing the collections planned by Bach himself from the detached chorales that have come down to us, the latter being freely grouped according to their style and their value. With an alphabetical index, any one of them could be found in a moment. It is also desirable that the texts should be printed along with the chorales, many of them having by this time disappeared from our hymn books. End of chapter 13.
Read for you by Chiquito Crasto. Music performed from the source text available in the public domain by Jonathan Schofield, Birmingham, Alabama.